Our first speaker is Mr. Eric G. Major. Mr. Major is one of the world's foremost specialists in investor immigration programs and policy. He is a CEO and global managing partner of Henley & Partners. And it is my pleasure to invite Mr. Major now to speak with us about the Global Citizenship by Investment Program. Mr. Major.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm here to tell you a bit about the global landscape of this industry called residence and citizenship by investment. A number of countries dwell in this area, and so I'm going to speak to you about that. A little bit about myself. There we go. Just newly joined, in fact, Henley & Partners about 9 months ago, after having 15 successful years running the HSBC Global Investor Immigration Services for that bank out of Vancouver. What we were doing is helping families migrate to Canada, to the UK, Singapore, and Hong Kong, all of which have such programs where residency privileges are provided in exchange for a significant investment. Obviously, this world of mine and this space collided very nicely with Henley & Partners, which obviously made their name and mark in doing precisely that, but into other countries, predominantly out of Europe, but also very active here in St. Kitts and Nevis, as some of you already know. They continue to facilitate residency and citizenship into about a dozen countries. I'll speak to you of 4 of them today, cognizant that I have barely a minute to go through my 20-page PowerPoint. So here we go. So briefly, again, on the firm with over 20 offices worldwide and about 40 staff, whose sole day job is sitting down with clients and explaining these various options available in the marketplace to have one's family become a resident or a citizen of a new nation. But we also have this very interesting group practice called the Government Advisory Group, which sit down with governments to develop these programs. As many of you know, we've been very active here in St. Kitts and Nevis in developing this program over the last 7 years. In fact, we get involved in varying degrees, be it in the design or the revision of existing programs if they already exist. We provide advice and counsel on how best to implement, and often get involved as well in promotion on the promotional side. So we work with the economic development agencies to promote the program and to try to attract foreign direct investment into the country. And so we've, as a firm, been doing this. Well, the firm's been around for over 40 years, but predominantly since 1997 has it been structured in the way in which this residence and citizenship group of roughly 40 people facilitate inbound investment and migration for about 12 countries. Here we go. So these are just quick examples of where we got involved as a firm. Myself was very actively involved with the last revision of the Federal Immigrant Investor Program with respect to the repositioning of that program that took place in 2010. Just a quick word on Canada, as we'll be speaking more about it in a minute, but it's been around for quite a while, 1986 in fact, and right now it's taking a bit of a breather, as we say in the industry, because they're going to be repositioning that program very shortly. I've also been very active with Henley & Partners, in fact, with the UK program, and the latest announcements that took place April of 2011, which I'll get into in a minute. And of course, St. Kitts, we've been very active and prevalent here and helping establish various elements of this program, including the SIDF. And Switzerland's a good example where we have expertise out of Zurich and other cantons where we help people move there. Malta, I was personally engaged in that one in terms of the last revisions of their program, and even Latvia. So I like this slide because this summarizes, I think, what's happening in the world. There's two very interesting dynamics. On the client side, the number of individuals and families that can avail themselves of these privileges of becoming a resident or a citizen of a different or a new country, that number grows each and every year. As for myself, 15 years in the business, or 15 I should say with HSBC, but 20 in the business, I can't believe I could say that now. This number has grown, the number of people who are looking into this. It's grown because the number of millionaires being produced on planet Earth grows by anywhere from 8 to 10% each and every year, according to a number of economic reports and surveys that banks are producing. Globalization and world travel in general is just creating a cross-pollination of people to discover new lands and to work and study abroad. And unfortunately, the world is still a complicated and difficult place at times, and so there's events that bring about people to think about a plan B or just another life. So in my years of doing this, I've kind of summarized it into 6 main reasons where people actually call us in looking into this. Security, again, the events of the Arab Spring, for example, or with the events sometimes in North Korea, it brings a lot of South Koreans to call us. If China and Taiwan are ruffling feathers, then Taiwanese are calling us. So there's a number of reasons. Security is another example where Mexico, for example, is getting a very difficult place to live, so people are looking to relocate to just improve their plight and their security. Some people, and this is a big element of what is bringing clients here or applicants into St. Kitts, is the mobility question. It's very difficult for someone from, whether it's Russia or Nigeria, to move around. They're always in lineups, visa posts around the world trying to get a visa. And it hinders their mobility and their ability to conduct proper business. So the mobility piece is a very important one. Quality of life goes without saying. Often out of our clients from Asia, there's a big push towards trying to acquire Western education for their children. And yes, wealth and tax planning comes into it. There's been obviously the recent storyline around Mr. Savrin, who's just recently expatriated out of the U.S. prior to the IPO launch of Facebook, as he was a minority shareholder of that company and wanted to avail himself of alternatives prior to crystallizing significant gains. So that also comes into play. What's new in my 20 years of doing this is that there's newcomers entering into the fray to attract these affluent, mobile, wealthy individuals in their family. And for obvious reasons, right? They're high value, they bring capital, much needed capital in this day and age. And apology for the equation there, but I couldn't help myself in summarizing it that the GDP equals consumption plus investment plus government expenditures plus exports minus imports. So what's happening today is that government expenditure is quiet. It's very dead. It has no capacity anymore. Investment is a hard thing to attract these days with the flat yield curves and just the economic environment since 2008. Consumption, well, the consumer in the Western world is under stress. So that's why we're seeing flat growth pretty much across the board, with a few exceptions in the emerging markets, of course, where the consumption piece and the investment piece is still very strong. So programs like this stimulate I, and they stimulate C. They stimulate C because even with a program whereby there's no physical legal requirement for physical presence, even if 1 out of 20 discover this country and make their way over for a visit, which I know many of them do, that brings tremendous consumption opportunity and obviously investment opportunity to the nation. Canada has understood this and done very well with this program. I'll get into that in terms of the ancillary benefits that these type of programs bring. In fact, I'll give you 4 quick examples, 3 on the resident side and 1 specifically with citizenship by investment. Now, bear in mind that all of these programs, with very few exceptions, all of them will send the applicant or allow the applicant to graduate, so to speak, to citizenship. It's just a question of how quickly. So we'll start with Canada, because by far this is the most active country. It has been for many years, approaching 30-plus years of attracting clients from around the world under their immigrant investor program. It's been around since '86. More than 130,000 individuals have migrated through this program. Its objective is very clear: is to attract wealthy individuals and their families to Canada by way of completing an investment that aims to promote economic development. There was a survey, or a report, I should say, an economic report last year that said that the objectives of the program has been clearly met, but also what's very interesting is that the ancillary benefits that these people bring is really where there's tremendous upside. If you consider that 3,500 immigrant investor families immigrate to Canada each and every year, that's about 12,000 to 15,000 individuals, because you have principal, applicant, and spouse, and 1 or 2 or 3 children. So you're looking at roughly 12,000 to 15,000 individuals making their way each and every year into that country through this investor stream. And that is tallying close to $3 billion that's being pumped into the Canadian economy. And so while the structure, as I say here, is beneficial on its own merit, the main economic benefits stem from the acquisition of assets in Canada, the report went on to say. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this very detailed chart, other than just to walk you through it, and I got my little pen on, there we go. So you got the investor that will have to invest 800,000 Canadian dollars through the banks. So the Canadian government decided to surround this program, or to frame it with banks that are subject to know your client rules and anti-money laundering requirements. And so the banks will receive from the client the 800,000 and then set it to Citizenship and Immigration Canada, who then allocates this money to the participating provinces, who then use the money for investment. However, this is a program where the government has, or the governments, the provincial governments, have to kick it all back in 5 years. So it is a loan, government-backed, by each of the individual provinces by way of their Ministry of Finance. So it's government guaranteed, and hence they get the immigrant gets the 800,000 back in 5 years. What I want to point out in saying all this to you, and this is the promissory note that ultimately the client or the immigrant will receive from the Canadian government, saying that the provinces severably and irrevocably guarantee the full reimbursement of that 800,000. So the client, when they do this, have the choice. They could either come up with their own resources to remit the money to the bank so that the bank could send it to the government, or they borrow the money. And that's becoming a very prevalent option, because about 95% of the clients don't give you 800,000, they borrow it. And they borrow it because the bank promises, the government promises to repay it, so the banks could lend against it. The moral of the story is that when you borrow it, the cost, the all-in cost, interest and fees, is about 200,000. Okay? So Canada is allowing permanent residence for people who meet certain criteria for about 200,000 Canadian dollars that you lose, being the interest cost. Okay? So that's basically what 98% of the clients will do. Now, retain that number if ever you have questions around how much all these things cost. It costs $200,000 to immigrate to Canada. Where does it go? Well, under the federal program, the provinces have used it predominantly towards public infrastructure. Some of it, like in BC, the British Columbia government has allocated a portion of that money into venture capital projects to stimulate that industry. Many PPPs, public-private partnerships type of arrangements, often linked to public infrastructure, and those are just examples here. It's worth mentioning that Quebec is a province that runs its own program, a parallel program with the same amounts and the same criteria. They just administer it on their own, and of course they get the benefit of the 800,000 on their own. And it's just to say that how that province has decided from a policy point of view is that they want to use this money to the benefit of small and medium-sized corporations that dwell in the following sectors: manufacturing and biotechnology. So as a government, one decides, each government can decide where they want to see the money being used, and that's frankly a bit of what the SIDF will be thinking about. Okay, on to America. Just one thing, I briefly made reference to this, that Canada is currently taking a pause of its program. It's received more applications than it could humanly process. Why? Because 200,000 Canadian dollars is not that expensive. They got more applications than they could deal with. They've put a pause. They're going to reposition the program, probably relaunch it next year with higher thresholds. The U.S., this program has been plagued with some challenges. You need a lot of the right dynamics for things to work. The policy's got to be right. The administration and the way you frame the program's got to be right. The practitioners who sell it have to see that it works. And obviously the immigrant has to see value in applying as well. And the Americans finally got it right with the EB-5. It's been around since 1990, but it's really only started to connect and do well in the marketplace since about 2005, 2006, I would say. And now is it's going to be this year the most popular program. Canada haven't taken that position for the last 20 plus years and will now supersede Canada. Essentially, it's a program that allows qualified investors and their family to achieve legal permanent residence, which is the green card, and is the stepping stone to becoming a citizen, which takes about 5 years. There are two programs. It started off with just being the $1 million when they first launched it in 1990. So you have to invest in a business $1 million US, and then create with that investment a minimum of 10 full-time jobs. That was very difficult. It led to a lot of franchise-type restaurants being set up to meet that job count. So there was this idea going back, I think, into 94, 95, where this concept of regional centers was developed. And so the notion here is you have a specific geographically defined area in a state somewhere that has, within that area, unemployment levels that are beyond or above, I should say, the national average. So it's the commercially or economically deprived region. So capital from abroad entering that region could be done for $500,000 as opposed to $1 million, and not being so strict on the direct job counts, because now the possibility of indirect jobs is also considered. So this is where most of the applications and the demand now lies. And it takes about 9 to 12 months to get through that process. And it is an investment at risk for $500,000. The applicant must show how they've acquired that money that's being invested. It's pretty straightforward. It's eligibility criteria. It's a 2-year journey to permanent residence. And you could live anywhere in the U.S. and not necessarily be tied to the specific investment location. So the U.S. is in this game. Again, quickly going through the UK. The UK has been in this business since 1994. And it's pretty straightforward as well. Just got to be 18 years or older and invest £1 million into, of which 750,000 has to be in a particular way, which is UK government bonds or UK shares, and 250,000 can be in other ways, including a bank deposit. So the magic number is $1 million, and in B here you see that you could also borrow it. That's basically what B is saying. If you're going to be borrowing money to make the investment, you have to demonstrate that you have a net worth exceeding £2 million. But the moral of the story is borrowing allows it to be done at a cost like Canada, 200,000. For the UK, it's about 200,000 pounds, in fact. All right. So again, there's no English requirements for this visa in the UK. There's no business experience requirement. There's no medical or government interview. Very straightforward, very pragmatic. So pragmatic that they wanted to really enter the fray aggressively in 2010 when they spoke with us. And we brought some modifications, what I'll tell you about. This is just to show you the journey that the client goes through. They apply, they get a 3-year visa, and after 3 years you apply for an extension, but you can only get the extension if you made the investment. So we show that they made the £1 million investment pursuant to the rules. They get another 2 years. So at the end of 5 years, you apply for permanent residence, assuming you've made the £1 million investment and assuming you've met the the residence requirements, which is only a requirement on the applicant, not on the spouse. I won't get into too many details there, but it's a 5-year journey. But then they realize that that was very onerous, that clients in this space, in this world, they're very cash rich, but they're time poor. So the government says, well, we got to do a little bit more here because we're trying to stimulate C and I to get GDP back up again. So they come up with this very pragmatic, well, I'll give you permanent residence after 3 years if you invest £5 million, and we'll give you permanent residence after 2 years if you invest £10 million. Okay, so this is United Kingdom. Again, all 3 programs I've just described are programs that lead to permanent residency, which is the platform to citizenship. Austria is unique because it has a provision in its rules to allow an applicant to qualify for citizenship without any prior residency, like St. Kitts in Nevis. Under the provisions of Section 10 of the Act, an applicant must provide scientific or artistic or cultural or economic benefit to the country. It's reviewed by a panel, a government ministry panel, and it's fully discretionary. The government will decide whether it meets this goal of giving a scientific contribution or artistic or cultural or economic contribution to the nation. In order to be eligible, you have to provide this substantive contribution into the Austrian economy, and the investment can take the form of a joint venture or a direct investment in a business creating jobs or generating new export sales. It can also be again, what we call on the cultural side, the recent example we had been involved with was an investment into there was one that was a community center that was very important on the sports and cultural side, and there was an art gallery as well. But most applicants look to set up a business which will create jobs, and that meets the economic benefit. But passive investment in government bonds like Canada or like the UK does not qualify. So it is a little bit more specific. It's not big numbers, and it's subject to discretion, of course. Now, here's what's happening. I was telling you that the demand side, the clients and the number of individuals that could avail themselves of these privileges is a number that grows each and every year substantially, keeping everyone very, very busy. What's changed in the last 5 years is the number of countries getting into the game. Just in the last few weeks, Ireland announced it's going to create an immigrant investor program. Australia on Friday announced that they were reinvigorating and resetting their immigrant investor program. Your neighbor, Antigua and Barbuda, has announced that they will be establishing a citizenship by investment. France has I say this because this has traditionally been an Anglo-Saxon kind of business, where the countries of English heritage for the most part, but France is now in this business of attracting high net worth, wealthy investors to inject capital into their economy. C plus I plus G is what they're trying to stimulate, or at least the C plus I. Malta has just recently revised their programs, such as St. Kitts and Nevis, by amending the amounts and erasing them earlier this year. Singapore did the same. They raised the amounts. And Canada is taking a pause and will be raising the amounts. So the moral of the story is a lot of participants. The number of countries are looking at this as a means to stimulate economic development, job creation, and just improving the general plight of what is, for everyone, a very difficult environment. And you have basically, in my 20 years of doing this, sitting down with governments, what have I seen as being the key elements to success in this area? Because unfortunately, I must say, there is quite a few examples, I should say, around such programs failing in other parts of the world. So there is at times a propensity for these things to self-implode. But if you frame them properly by good planning, good preparation, good public relations, and informing and communicating with the citizens of the country, which is what this is a little bit about today. You have to have it also framed in the proper legal and regulatory framework. You have to be strong on the operations and resource things properly. You have to really have a strong and vigorous due diligence procedures and having, I would say, partners to help do this work of vetting the applicants. You have to have independent audits, which is what PwC brings into the equation. Obviously, transparency of the structuring questions and all the operations, and it's just a general public oversight as well. So the moral of the story is you're successful in this business only if you do it right. And that's what will pass the test of time. If you run things with good governance and integrity, the success and longevity will occur. And that's basically the experience that I've witnessed here in St. Kitts and Nevis. And I congratulate you in setting up a very successful and strong and vigorous program. Thank you very much.